Let me just tell you a little bit about Ashby, a little bit about Charles, and we'll get right on with our program. I've known Ashby for probably 15, 20 years. Our kids went to grade school together, graduated from high school together. And he's a great guy, and I just met Charles tonight, but Charles, we're glad you're here too. Charles, Ashby is the president and founder of Vector Money Management, which is an independent financial management firm here in Jackson. Interestingly, he is a graduate of the United States Military Academy in West Point.
Wow,
And served
right.
5 years. We appreciate your service.
Yes, we do.
Ashby served 5 years in the Army Field Artillery Unit. He went to work for Sunburst Bank. Later, as I said, founded his own firm and has served on many boards in the Jackson and Mississippi area. Most recently, he is on the board and I believe chairman of the Institute for Technology Development. He is the chair of their investment committee and oversees a $5 million endowment. So he's got some financial skills, and apparently people with power entrust him to manage their money. He is the head of his think tank, which is called BiggerPieForum.org. And I've been seeing a little bit about that online and other places. And Ashby and Charles are going to tell us about Bigger Pie Forum. He is written extensively, and many of you have probably read a lot of his work in the Clarion Ledger. I see it in there from time to time. He writes guest editorials. Been published in the National Review Online and the American Spectator. And Charles, as I said, is here. And Charles is has a PhD in chemistry. Has worked, I believe, in Connecticut, and had his own startup company up there. Later went to work with the Bayer company. Would that be, is it Bayer Aspen? Okay, that's a big company, international company. And so his background is in chemicals and management. He conducts his own personal investments and is semi-retired now and serves on several boards. So gentlemen, without any further ado, we want to turn the program over to you. And we'll wait and have about a 10 or 15 minute time for questions at the end. So if you have some questions, make a mental note, and Ashby and Charles will be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. And we're going to go back and forth here. If you want to run the slide projector, Charles, so you can remind me if I leave something out. And then likewise, I'll return the favor. The subject of the title for our presentation is Kemper IGCC plant, Boon or Boondoggle. Somebody from the Tea Party had actually come up with that Boon or Boondoggle, and I incorporated it into the title. The IGCC is Integrated Gasification Combined Cycle Plant. That's what they're building up in Kemper. And but first I want to give a little background information on Bigger Pie Forum. Y'all may have heard of the Institute for Technology Development. ITD is what it's called. It got started back in the mid-'80s. And the purpose of ITD was to do research and development in hopes of generating economic growth for Mississippi. And in the subsequent 25 years since they got started, a lot of that mission was taken over by the research universities, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Southern, Jackson State, and ITD wasn't having much of an impact on the hard research level. So we decided to let those researchers we had on our staff down at the Senate Space Center move on to universities where they got most of the grant money. And then we took the modest money we had left and we decided to pursue economic growth for Mississippi in a different way, and that was to focus on the public policy arena and focus on government policy that would be pro-growth and hopefully improve the economic growth in Mississippi and make the pie bigger. And so what we started was, we went live about a year ago, BiggerPieForum.org, and we invite you to visit our website. And it's a 501c3 educational not-for-profit enterprise. Our website right there, our Facebook page as well. We have a Facebook page. We have about 21,950 fans on our Facebook page. And you can also follow us at twitter.com if you use Twitter. So it was Bigger Pie that actually got Charles and I working on this, because Charles is also a board member of Bigger Pie. So we're both board members of the Bigger Pie Forum. And he's also a board member of ITD. cornerstone, one of the cornerstones of economic growth is, for any particular area, is to have a cheap, reliable source of power. If you don't have power at a competitive price, then it's difficult to, really grow a business and be competitive yourself. Let me read the mission statement for Bigger Pie Forum. At Bigger Pie Forum, we research and share ideas that will encourage economic freedom, discourage cronyism, and help to invigorate Mississippi's economic growth. I think that's pretty much in line with what the Tea Party's about. I hope it is. And so one of the first things that jumped out at us when we got started about a year ago with our, went live online, was the Kemper plant, because as we saw it, it was contrary to the idea of having a cheap, reliable source of power, because it was going to cause we've really focused on that, done a lot of research, and Charles has brought a lot of background in the chemical industry to this endeavor, and done a lot of the really deep in the weeds research on the Kemper plant. This slide here, we're going to show you 4 slides, the charts, that we think help demonstrate why Kemper is a bad idea for the consumers in Mississippi, in the southeast Mississippi. And this first chart we have here is the cost of a kilowatt hour being produced by Kemper burning syngas, which is the way it's designed to burn syngas, versus the cost if it was just a natural gas burning plant. So if you look on the left-hand side of the scale there, or the y-axis, you can see that it's in cents. So you've got at the top it's 30 cents, 25 cents, 15, 10, down to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And the red line is the cost of the Kemper plant, of the electricity it's going to produce. And it starts out at 25 cents per kilowatt hour in the first year. Now the x-axis is years 1 through 40, because it's a 40-year life plant. And you can see there it starts out at 25 cents per kilowatt hour. Now the average kilowatt hour that Mississippi Power has produced over the last several years has been around 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So right off the bat, they're 150% higher electricity costs from that plant. Within about 7 years, it drops down to around 18 cents. And then gradually, all the way out to 40 years, it never gets below 13 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, if you took a natural gas plant in lieu of the plant as currently designed, and we made reasonable estimates on what the price of natural gas is going to be, you can see that blue line, it never gets, even gets to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's a very expensive electricity that you're producing year after year after year. If you go to the next slide, Charles. Now we take that same data for the Kemper plant and you arrange it, so it's cumulative over those 40 years. So the cost as it builds up, so the total amount spent on electricity on the Kemper plant over the 40-year life of the plant. And you can see the red line going up there as the amount spent over the plant's life. You end up with $12.7 billion spent on the Kemper electricity versus a natural gas plant when you would have spent $6.2 billion over those 40 years. So that's a difference of $6.5 billion that the extra that the customers of Mississippi Power have to pay. So that's $6.5 billion that won't be available to buy cars or food or clothing, housing, or tuition, and all these different things. That's a pretty tough blow for a service area that has 186,000 people in it, or customers in it. One more slide here that shows the cost comparison. And this is capital investment per kilowatt capacity. And you can see the blue line is the cost of Kemper per kilowatt, and it's $7,000 per kilowatt capacity. A natural gas plant would be $1,000, or 1/7 the price of Kemper. And then this green bar is one you may have seen in the newspaper. Entergy within the past year bought a merchant power plant that was on the west side of Jackson. It had been recently built about 13 or 14 years by, I believe it was Duke Energy at the time, built that plant. It has about 400 megawatt capacity. They paid about $250 million for it. Then they had to upgrade it, so they upgraded, complete with the upgrade, it cost around $500 or $600 million. So their cost per kilowatt hour works out to about $500 per kilowatt hour. So you can see how far out of line it is, Kemper is, with relative to other alternatives.
Wow.
The Jackson plant was offered to Mississippi Power before Energy, right?
Right.
And they declined. Now this is a relatively complicated chart here, and what it does is take the total, 40 years worth of money that Kemper's going to generate versus the 40 years of the natural gas plant. I'm going to let Charles explain this. This is really Charles's, data that he put together on the analysis of the plant.
Well, so what this chart tells you is, so the first question you might ask is, so why would someone build a plant that costs $7,000 per kilowatt when you could build a new, tried and true, well-proven plant for $1,000 a kilowatt? And we think this is part of the answer. Utilities earn their profit on the amount of capital they spend. So a utility has a big incentive to convince the regulators that they need a big expensive plant instead of a simple, inexpensive plant. And so by spending $4 billion on Kemper, which is roughly what the plant is going to cost, right now they're projecting $3.8 billion total for the whole complex. The independent monitor for the Public Service Commission has submitted a report that says, in their opinion, it will likely go over the $3.8 billion, past $4 billion. So why spend $4 billion on a plant when for under $1 billion you could have had the same amount of electricity with a new, very efficient, new natural gas plant at the same site or at another site? So if you look at where the $12.7 billion goes, you can see that Mississippi Power's claim that the lignite is cheap, the energy in the lignite is cheap, is correct. That's the little dark blue. And you can see that the natural gas, cost of natural gas over 40 years is a bigger number. But then you have all the capital, return on capital, interest, and much higher operating costs for the Kemper plant because it's a much more complex plant. So here's the real answer. Here's just the profit that Mississippi Power Southern will make, $3.5 billion. Whereas if they built a natural gas plant, made the same rate of return on their money that they make over there, but because of the lower capital, what is it, about 800 and some odd million? So over 4 times. Now, originally, before the special purpose bond that the legislature passed back in February and March, that shifts $1 billion of this investment entirely onto the consumers. Mississippi Power no longer has any responsibility for it. It will be paid directly by ratepayers. Before that was done, Mississippi Power's profit was going to be well over $4 billion here. But there were some financial issues that they ran into, and so they shifted some of the cost, and the legislature supported them doing that. Then the other big cost components here are all the depreciation, the interest on the debt. So this is just profit. This is just profit on the equity of Mississippi Power. The depreciation or recouping the money they spent on the plant, interest on that, operating cost almost $3 billion over the years, and so forth. You can see over here all the numbers are much smaller because it's a much less complex plant, much less expensive. So at the end of the real story here is, why would you build such a big, expensive plant? If you're a ratepayer, you might not want to do that. If you're a Southern company, this or this.
Right. That's simple enough, isn't it?
So I want to dig a little deeper into the plant itself to give you all some, sort of idea of what all is involved. And this, we've got a cartoon figure here of the plant itself, with many of the different components that go into it. And at the bottom it says current price tag, $3.8 billion for the entire plant. Now, it's important to realize that it has within the plant, this part right here, is a combined cycle plant that burns the syngas. So this is where your electricity is produced right here. And the cost of that is around $700 million. But it's everything to the left of this point right here is where the real expense and controversy is. And this is sort of the experimental part. It's really just a big chemical plant is what it is. They're getting into the chemical business, and they could just pump natural gas right in here, and you can produce the electricity they need. But it's the chemical plant that really is the challenge. Now, so let's see. Let me go back one slide here before we get to that. Okay. So one of the key questions we've got, they've already built or spent like $2.5 billion at this point, putting up big gasifiers and all that it takes to take the damp, wet dirt that's lignite, dry it out, then gasify it, then break it into all its components and parts, the nitrogen oxide, the carbon dioxides, the sulfuric oxides, and then create the syngas that goes into the plant. So the question is this a done deal? Is there anything that can be done? And we wouldn't be here talking if we didn't think there was something that could be done, and that it, in fact, was not a done deal. So if you turn to the next slide, the reason it's not a done deal is that it's the Public Service Commission's responsibility to determine what is a prudent investment. And they haven't done that yet. In other words, the prudency reviews, the only thing that's actually been approved for prudency was the $30 million initially when they first got underway. So the entire plant right now, there's probably 75% finished in building it, still hasn't had any prudency reviews from the Public Service Commission. So it's not a done deal from the standpoint of the train's already left the station and we just have to wring our hands and feel sorry for it, because there is something that can be done. So here's the chemical plant side of it I was talking about. The current price tag of that is $3.1 billion, and that's the area that we think is imprudent. Is there anything else we need to mention about that?
Yeah.
Okay. And here's this is the regular combined cycle plant. That if they just put a fence around the chemical plant, you can take the natural gas, which is being pumped up there anyway, because they use natural gas in the plant, and you can put it into those generators and easily produce the power that they expect to produce in this plant. The next one more slide. There we go. So natural gas is the prudent way to use what they've got to produce electricity. Syngas is not. Now this chart looks a lot like the first chart we showed, which was the price of a kilowatt hour from natural gas versus kilowatt hour from the syngas. But the y-axis on this chart is different. Instead of cents per kilowatt hour, this is dollars per million BTU. So BTU is British thermal unit, and it's how you quantify the value or the heat value of a fuel. So we've got here, you see the two, natural gas is sold by the dollars per BTU. And you can see that the BTU of natural gas, the value there goes along here and never gets above, it starts out at 5, it's actually 4 right now, but we used to use 5 up to 10. And during that lifetime of the plant, the syngas that they're producing, BTU value, or the cost per BTU, never gets below $15. So syngas is just not a prudent fuel to use. It's very expensive. The lignite's cheap, but the cost to turn the lignite into syngas is extremely expensive, and that's why it ends up being very expensive electricity. So what action is prudent now? This is what I would offer to you is we have another solution than the one that Mississippi Power wants to have, and that is the used and useful determination after the plant is shown to work properly. In other words, wait until the plant gets up. They've got all these promises. Wait till it's actually up and running to prove to them that it's actually working like they say it's going to work, because so far in the Public Service Commission hearings that they've had, when Brandon Presley, one of the commissioners, has asked the Mississippi Power if they could guarantee that it was going to work, they have not been willing to say that they can guarantee it's going to work. Mississippi Power and Southern Company should absorb the losses, $3.1 billion of capital costs that are in Prudent, and the ratepayers should absorb and pay for the $700 million of the combined cycle plant as part of the capital cost, and then for the natural gas as the fuel going forward. So that's our what we think is the approved solution for the best for the state and for particularly for the ratepayers in southeast Mississippi. All the charts we've got, but we'd be glad to answer any specific questions that y'all have on the plan. Yes, sir.